All right, everybody, we've got a special treat for you today, and good news that this treat will continue with a new weekly series we're doing with Michael Yon. And the purpose of this really is to summarize what these two guys, Doug and Michael Yon, see as the most noteworthy news event or observation they had in the prior week, and then to make some specific predictions about what you can expect in the near future. So thanks for doing this, Michael. First, starting with you, what's the big thing you saw this week that you think is of great consequence?
Well, firstly, the massive hurricane damage from Helena, which is still unfolding up in North Carolina and Tennessee, Georgia, Florida as well, actually, and other places. I mean, it's pretty intense. People like Ann Vandersteel and Doc Pete Chambers and many others are up there right now. They're literally sending me reports today. They're up there in helicopters today, rescuing people, helping people. I mean, the immediate rescues of people on the roof type thing, those are finished. But there are a lot of denied areas up there in Western North Carolina, for example. I spent a couple of years, by the way, up in Western North Carolina near Murphy in a place called Andrews. And it's a lot of people don't realize how intense those mountains are just because they're not the Himalayas. They are very rugged, and there's a lot of flash floods up there and whatnot. Then we transition. And by the way, there's a lot of lithium and other things up there that bring a lot of questions to the table about whether or not the government's doing another grab, which we saw in Maui and we see happening constantly in other ways, actually. But now let's transition over to the Milton hurricane that just took off into the Atlantic right now. It's probably tossing a few boats around out there right now. That was a Category 5 for a while. But by the time it got to Florida, I was watching it. I watched it for about 12 hours straight because I have family and friends there, and I was getting ready in case it was a worst case scenario to immediately fly out of here. Doug and I are in Thailand right now. And so that's literally the other side of the world, 12 time zones away. And so, but luckily, I mean, I have friends all over Florida, all the way down from the Keys, all the way up to the Panhandle and everywhere in between. I mean, I'm from Winter Haven, Florida, right in the middle of Florida. And so I was quite concerned that we were going to lose Tampa to a Category 5 hurricane and St. Pete because that's where it was lined up on. And but then it started to break apart there at the last minute, and it was still, I think, Category 2 or 3 when it came on across Florida. And then right there in Polk County in the center of Florida, almost at the geographical center of Florida, which is actually at Lake Wales. But in Mulberry in Polk County is where there's a huge phosphate mine. It's massive. I mean, I think the tallest mountain in Florida is right there. It's not really a mountain. They're phosphate mounds. They're about 100 meters high, I believe. And the highest hill in Florida, I think, is almost exactly the same height up in the Panhandle. So I'm not sure which one's the tallest, the phosphate hills but when I was a child, I used to get shark's teeth out there and that sort of thing in the phosphate mines. They won't let you do it anymore. But what I'm getting to is phosphate is very important for food production, phosphorus, nitrogen, that sort of thing. And we've already seen many things happening with the food supply and the natural gas, for instance, that is needed for the Haber-Bosch process to make nitrogenous fertilizers has been gravely interrupted with the destruction of Nord Stream and the closure of Groningen gas field in northern Netherlands and many other things, right? And so what we're looking at is one item after another getting kind of knocked off the list, which is creating higher food prices, right? Which creates more obvious problems for everybody in the world as we see the economies doing what they're doing now. But luckily, I think that the phosphate mines were not badly damaged this time. I hope not. But anyway, I was looking at more than just roofs getting blown off. I was concerned about that phosphate as well and other items. But so right now, there was some very intense hurricanes there. I think a lot of people saw that. But to my knowledge, there wasn't widespread Category 5 devastation, for which I'm very thankful.
Yeah, I'm kidding. All right, Doug, what's your big one for the week?
Well, it's no surprise that I also was thinking about, independently of Michael, what the hurricane was all about. And not being terribly conspiracy oriented, but I'm interested in what other people think about these things, that there were allegations made that maybe it was the US government's HAARP program, HAARP, which is a an operation in Alaska that can reach out with high frequency electrical waves to the ionosphere. Some people are thinking, well, they're using that to control the weather. And another allegation that was made is that there's such a thing as what's called AEI, atmospheric aerosol injection. Anyway, atmospheric aerosol injection, where it's that the government, well, Bill Gates has thought about this too, injecting substances into the stratosphere, such as sulfuric acid, to cloud things over and cool the planet. Carbon sequestration, which is a big deal. This is all about global warming and reducing our carbon footprint. So what does that have to do with the weather? And then there's sun dimming. There are a number of processes that are being promoted, everything from a giant shield sent out a couple of 100 miles out there in between the Earth and the sun to dim the sun. So there's that. And oddly enough, just before I got to Thailand, I'm a fan of Neil Stephenson, of course, science fiction writer. Diamond Age, I think, is a seminal book that he wrote. Very smart guy, very prolific guy. I was very disappointed in Neil. I read his last book, which is called Termination Shock. And it's all about how some World Economic Forum types get together to independently send rockets to the ionosphere and cloud. So there's all this talk about modifying the weather. And people were saying, well, here we have a Category 5 hurricane coming on the heels of Helen. Maybe there are some nefarious actors at large. But talking to Michael, he pointed out that CENTCOM is headquartered in Tampa.
You're right. Mm-hmm.
So you wouldn't think that they would send a gigantic hurricane to destroy a major military information center. Anyway, bottom line, I guess this is just one of these things that happen in nature. And it turns out that in the time that we've been recording hurricanes and how much storm surge there is and winds and all this type of thing, roughly the last 150 years, neither of these hurricanes have been anything special. And there have been lots more hurricanes in the past than there have been this year. So you can believe in conspiracy theories, and I believe in many, as I know that you guys do too. But the fact that this was a government-created hurricane, very unlikely.
Yeah. Yeah, I know a lot of people, the big debate online is that whether or not this is even possible. It clearly is possible to manipulate the weather. I mean, in 1977, there was a UN treaty signed where all the parties agreed to not use weather modification in war. Why would they do that in 1977? Because they must have been worried about something real. But you can't jump to conclusions and say that's what was done here. If anything, I think there's some evidence that this Category 5, Milton, that was heading towards CENTCOM, was actually lowered by cloud seeding. There were NOAA aircraft flying around in circles right ahead of the storm, right around Tampa. So I think if anything, if they were involved, they actually stopped it.
Well, that's a possibility. And I remember, of course, as you all know, I'm a huge fan of Carl Barks' Donald Duck, and especially Uncle Scrooge comic books. And when I was a little kid, I remember once Donald, in one of his many failed entrepreneurial ventures, had a cloud seeding plane, and he managed to drop the raindrops right on the fence row. And this was back in the mid-1950s. So that there were cloud seeders doing silver iodide, I believe, is the chemical used way back when. So this is nothing new.
Interestingly, you told me that a couple of days ago on Donald Duck. So I looked it up, and because it sounded pretty cool. And I think it was 1958. So the thing that Doug's talking about, I found it on the Library of Congress because it was in a comic book, but also there's a video. And so it's black and white, 1958. But then while looking for the Donald Duck thing, I found a Porky Pig, I think from 1936, which is similar. Porky Pig doing the cloud seeding thing. I think it was 1936. So that was even predating Donald Duck.
But that's before Disney
Yeah.
went wef and evil. So
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, they're pretty funny actually. The like shooting a pill into the sky and causing it to rain.
Yeah, that's what it's pretty. It's so basically these things aren't impossible, but you can't necessarily ascribe all of this. I mean, there are hurricanes; they exist. It happens.
I mean, weather modification is a done deal. That's definitely real. Whether or not we can control the weather, that's obviously there. I mean, obviously most of the energy is coming from the sun and that sort of thing. And we're just little frogs on lily pads compared to that. But modifying it, we're causing it to rain at certain times or not to rain. I mean, they've been doing that for years, and there's no conspiracy about that. That's just on the table.
You know what?
They do
One
it
interesting thing. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
They do it here in Thailand. Maybe 10 or 15 years ago, I was offered to go fly with somebody who cloud seeds in Thailand. I didn't get the chance to actually do it. But I mean, I know that they actually have done it here because I was offered to go fly. No conspiracy. It's just like that. Seeing the clouds, you know.
yeah, and it may be politically incorrect for me to say this, but perhaps the Indians did a reverse rain dance to calm down Milton a little bit.
What did I say on this point before we move on to the next one is that the strange thing about the people in their ideological thinking these days, it's always two camps on everything. There's always two camps. And the strange thing about this one is that the people who are on the left, who are in this case totally denying that weather modification really even exists, it's so insane you'd be saying that, you know, that we can't manipulate the weather like that, also do in fact believe that we can control climate.
Yeah, that's the most important point that we left out. It's like, no, you can't possibly make a raindrop come out of the sky, but you can control the climate.
Yeah,
by eating hamburgers.
Exactly. Exactly. All right, what's your second one, Michael?
Let's talk about dog kings, information war, because that's what we're talking about here anyway. A lot of it. I mean, no matter what we talk about, we seem to drift into information war every time because information wars is the highest form of warfare, right? And one of the things that has occurred historically is something called the dog king strategy. When one king runs another king off or kills him or whatever, actually make a dog into a king and give him the necklace and the throne and all that and servants. And the dog says you need to work more hours today or whatever. And people are like, yeah, but he's a dog. He's not our king. And like, well, he actually is your king. So he's a dog king. So it demoralizes the people that, worship that position of the throne. But it also emboldens your enemies. It's a demoralization for one set and emboldening your enemies. And obviously there are dog kings everywhere you look, across the United States, Europe, Japan. It's just like everywhere you look, there's increasingly, let's say, entropy has hit our selection process, if there is a selection process. And we're actually, these choices that we have, for instance, down in Texas, I was going against Governor Abbott, Greg Abbott in Texas, hardcore before the last election. And I'm in Texas a lot. I love Texas. Some of my Texas friends will 100% see this because they watch you guys. Hello in Texas. But some of them got quite upset that I was against Abbott. And they would say, well, who do you want? Beto? Because Beto is a complete freak. And the obvious answer is no, I don't want Beto, but I am telling you with certainty, Abbott is WEF, 100%. He's on their website. He tantamount admits to it. I mean, he is WEF. He's like the sector chief, the Texas sector chief for World Economic Forum. And during the COVID pandemic, he was down in RGV a lot, Rio Grande Valley, down near SpaceX. He would go speak at this Hilton Hotel, which is where I saw him last year. And he's down there. That place was not locked down. Their economy grew during the pandemic, right? Why did it grow? That's part of the corridor that's coming up through Central America, up through Mexico, goes up what's called the I-69 corridor, and then joins in with these other feeders and goes up by the Great Lakes, by Chicago. You know who else has a headquarters at Chicago? World Economic Forum, right? So, I mean, this is not a coincidence, right? There's a reason why we outed that Colony Ridge, which is this, it's a sort of invasion city, let's say, north of Houston. It's called Colony Ridge. It houses about 200,000, or will house about 200,000 people. I was first told about it by my friend Todd Bensman, a retired intelligence guy in Texas. And we went over there, got an airplane, went above it. We're down looking at it a couple of years ago. And we're like, wow, this is going to be used to, this is unbelievable. They're putting 200,000 illegal aliens just by Houston, right? And right by I-69 corridor, by the way. And so we took a couple congressmen up there. I got helicopters arranged and that sort of thing. And, came back with the Epoch Times and Daily Wire and let's call it the Daily Israel at this point. And it took various people up into the helicopter and showed them what's going on the ground as well. And now there's a huge lawsuits going on and this, that, and the other. But then from there, I moved the team down to SpaceX, right? Because we were trying to get Elon Musk to pay attention to the border. And SpaceX at Boca Chica is right on the border. Like, for instance, when those rockets launch from the launch pad at Boca Chica, the people on the Mexican side are in direct danger. I mean, you would never be able to get that close to a launch in the United States. It's epic. And so, but the point is the aliens come right across the Rio Grande onto SpaceX property, right? That's why we spent so much time there. And then we moved over to where Governor Abbott came and spoke, and all these business leaders were there. There were highway patrolmen from Florida in their highway patrol cars from Florida in Texas, right? And they're all filling up the Hilton Hotel and filled with law enforcement from all over the country. Why are they all there while Governor Abbott speaks, right? Part of his security is literally, he can't make up this stuff. And I took a bunch of photos, but and Greg Abbott was closer than this microphone to me, right? He wheeled right by. So, I mean, and so I was asking the business people, why does he come down here so often? And I already knew the answer because we had just been, Ann Vandersteel and I had just been talking with one of the biggest ranchers there. And he's like, they're taking all of our ranches. They're directing our water from the Rio Grande down to Mexico. They're breaking the treaty. They're putting us out of business, right? They're taking our farms. They're taking our ranches. He's been there since more than 100 years with his family and that sort of thing. And we're in this huge ranch house. This is before that, before the Abbott came. And so I'm at this thing with Abbott, and here comes the mayor came by, and we started talking. I said, why is Mexico taking our water, right? He starts bragging about how he's putting the ranchers out of business so they can build stuff there, like shopping malls, and get a higher tax base. I mean, you can't make up. This is one of America's most fertile areas, right? They're taking our water, violating our treaty with Mexico. We're buying vegetables and other things from Mexico that we could be growing and should be growing on our side, but we're giving them the water, right? Why is all this happening? And why does Greg Abbott constantly go down there? Because that's part of the WEF corridor, all these places like Panama and Netherlands that I keep going to. So recently, Greg Abbott was back over in India, of course, and he was at Mumbai, which is part of the corridor, the Indo-European corridor that will go from India over to UAE, through Jordan, or through Saudi, through Jordan, and then through Israel and through Gaza, right? Through Gaza and through Haifa, right? These are major corridors. So a lot of these things that you see happening, they're not coincidental, right? Some things, of course, there is noise in the system where there are coincidental things that happen, but there is a lot of intent going on with the different things that we see, like the Darien Gap being chopped down so that a road can be built through. Anyway, I'll talk all night, Doug.
And that none of that is possible without dog kings. None of it's possible without dog kings.
I'm sorry, I left from dog kings to out in the jungle in the Darien Gap.
Well, you left out the best part, Michael. The dog king was from medieval Denmark, and it was a Danish king that overthrew, if I'm getting this right, overthrew another king, and he's the one that instituted a dog who would be their new king of the conquered people.
Yeah,
Am I close?
You're close. It may have been there or Sweden and Norway. I've forgotten specifics, but also there were some dog kings down in Africa. We've found in some old documents. But anyway, actually, I want to know more about dog kings myself. When I first discovered that term, it came from Al Johnson, whom you met, and Al, because we kept talking about this, like, who are these people that are installed? This is a clear information operation. Al Johnson and I, we've been attacking information operations for years all over Asia and back in the United States. I mean, we've been fighting Chinese Communist Party information operations. I've actually written 3 books on it. Unfortunately, they're only in Japanese, but because I've been trying to wake up the Japanese. But the bottom line is is we were like, where did this come from? And Al, being who he is, I call him Spock. And he found some old document talking about dog kings. And then we found some more. And we're like, okay, that's what they used to call these things. So we just reinvigorated the old term.
I love it. I think it describes our leaders perfectly now.
Yeah,
Yep.
it does. When you mention Dog King, I think about Kamala as being our future Dog King.
Total dog king.
Total. But you mentioned Greg Abbott. It's funny. He's a nothing nobody, and I wouldn't even remember his name except for the fact that one of my old friends in Aspen is also named Greg Abbott, but he actually did something with his life. He's not just a politician. He was the inventor of the "Our eggs are your legs" pantyhose thing.
The lace pantyhose.
Interesting.
That's how he made his fortune. His name is also Greg Abbott, but he's in Aspen, just a retired rich guy at this point. But anyway, talking about this, politicians, Trump did a couple of things. A couple of things happened with Trump this week that I think are interesting. One, Trump has come out and said that if he's elected, he will work to see if there's no tax levied on overseas Americans. There are about 2.7 million American taxpayers. I'm talking kids or spouses. 2.7 million American taxpayers that live in foreign countries and have to pay U.S. taxes, even if they never set foot back in the United States again. I think it's great that Trump said that, but I don't know. In this envy-driven election, it's probably going to be used against him because the Democrats are going to say, and Trump wants to give a tax holiday to all these people that are outside of the U.S. and got all this from the U.S. and have run away from our noble tax system and all that. Anyway, a reason why I hope Trump is elected, but it won't go anywhere.
He wants to free some of the slaves, of which there are a few of them on this call.
Oh, speaking of which, we should talk about the Jones Plantation.
Oh, we should mention that movie.
Oh,
We should
good
mention
Lord.
it every time, of course. The other thing that Trump said that would do if he's elected is he would have school vouchers available for everybody so they could send their kids off to private schools or what do they call those
Charter schools.
Yeah, right. Great idea. The teachers unions will fight that tooth and nail, of course, but it'll be used against him. He wants to destroy the American educational system and all that. So I don't know if it's going to get him any extra voters, but it's going to certainly, these things, unfortunately, in our envy-driven society are going to be used against him by the bad guys. Two other things about Trump. Bob Woodward's book came out this week, I think, and I have a couple of notes here. Woodward said that as far as he was concerned, Trump is unsuited to be president. Well, thank you, Bob Woodward. I mean, you're a creature of the Beltway. The guy's lived within the Washington Beltway his whole life, associating with these people, writing about him. So of course he's going to say that about Trump. Whether it's true objectively or not, I'm not going to comment on that, but he's a lot better than Kamala. And he also said that Kamala, I keep mispronouncing her name, I'll have to refer back to what her stepdaughters, how they pronounce their dumb convention. But Woodward, showing what a lickspill journalist he has, described her in the book as being shrewd and loyal. Well, maybe she's loyal the way a dog is loyal, or even a dog king is loyal. But shrewd, she's stupid. I mean, she's actually a low IQ. Anyway, that's what Bob Woodward says. And the last thing that they brought up about Trump is they say that he sent a COVID testing machine to our arch enemy, Putin, back in 2020. Well, this is supposed to make Trump evil for giving a survival machine to an evil dictator. But this is also stupid because, as we know, the whole COVID thing was a scandal. COVID testing was even more of a scandal. And these people will dig up anything to throw against Trump. I'm not defending Trump for lots of reasons, but I'm just pointing these things out to show how evil the enemy is. It wouldn't matter if it was George Washington or Jesus Christ running against Kamala. they'd be telling the same kind of evil lies about them too.
All right. Michael, number 3, what do you got?
You know what? The Jones Plantation. Doug said last week we should watch it, so we watched it together. And that's a pretty epic movie for those who haven't seen it. Then we watched it again, and Doug didn't watch it with us that time, and because it was so interesting and has so many layers to it. And for those, by the way, who've seen the Jones Plantation, it's got a lot of hidden messages in it. For instance, how the banking systems are used to enslave us. And also there was some so subtle, I'm not sure if they were messages or not. At one point, for those who've seen the movie know who I'm talking about, a guy gets shot in bed. His name is Morgan. And then there's a flag that they hold out over Jones Plantation just after that moment. And it's JP, Jones Plantation. I don't know, maybe it's not connected, but in time and space in the movie, it was kind of connected.
Yeah, it's a really worthwhile movie to see. And it'll show anybody that watches it how they may think they're free, just like the slaves on Jones Plantation thought they were free, but it was out with the old boss and with the new boss. Nothing had changed.
Oh,
It
it was
shows
the slave money thing. Sorry, sir.
No, I was gonna say, it shows the use of dog kings. Right?
Yeah.
It's just it's a surrogate leader to get you, make you think that you're getting something different. And it shows the lie of the two-party system that we have. And it's very important to watch it if you haven't seen it. It really does open your mind if these ideas are new to you.
Yeah, it's definitely worth it. And again, when somebody like Abbott is running for governor or president or whatever, they always put something like Kamala against them. Either one that gets put in serves the purpose. It doesn't matter because it's a bigger game. Coke versus Pepsi when the shareholders are Ford versus Chevy. Well, where you concentrated on that instead of everything else around you. Target fixation while you get eaten by a crocodile.
Yeah.
And just in case there are some people in the audience that, against all odds, don't have a little grip of Spanish, because of course Spanish has become the second language in the US. Kamala means so bad, malo, so bad, or how bad in Spanish. So hopefully our Spanish-speaking voter brethren will pick that up. Oh, and also pick up the fact that another way of pronouncing it in Spanish is Kamala, Kamala, which means bed her, referring to a rather sketchy past as a whole. You can also say Kamala. That's another Kamala, burn, and la was her, burn her. So any way you pronounce her name in Spanish,
It's fun. It's
Yeah.
fun.
It's fun, right?
All right. What do you got? So Jones Plantation. Doug, what's your last one? The last
don't know.
noteworthy item.
One thing I was thinking of, I was reading an old edition of, it's rather shameful when I catch myself reading these ultra left-wing magazines like The Economist of London. And they brought up this fellow, his name is Ruskoff, who 2 years ago, he's written a book about his experiences. He's a psychologist / economist, but 5 billionaires were worried about the coming civil war just a couple of years ago. So 5 billionaires fly him in specially and pay him a lot of money to consult with them on what they should do to keep their guards for their bunkers. These guys all have bunkers. What they should do to keep the guards from taking over and basically turning the tables on them, stealing all their money from them. And he didn't have any good answers. But one thing that he said in the article in The Economist was, I don't understand why these guys were asking me, because I'm a Marxist. Well, that's a good observation on his point. I mean, how stupid are these billionaires that they would ask an avowed Marxist what they should do about keeping the peasants down? Well,
He needs to read the Prince. They need to read the Prince,
Yeah.
which specifically talks about that gold.
anyway, the situation is serious. And this is a problem with our wealthy class. These rich people, these billionaires, are actually their own worst enemies. They have no philosophical grounding. They have no historical grounding. They're just afraid to keep the money that they have, and they don't know where to turn to. Turning to a Marxist professor, for God's sake, for advice on how to keep things together after the flag goes up. Anyway, I thought I'd mention that because it's just so perverse and stupid and disgusting.
It's really interesting, though, that this is a few years ago, that these people are thinking about this. They're stupid in some ways, but they can see what's coming, and preparations are being made. Mark Zuckerberg famously building this huge underground compound in Hawaii.
Yeah. And of course, all these people are in New Zealand. And the fact is that on November 5th, it doesn't matter who wins that election. I believe it's the Democrats that are going to win because they've got millions of aliens, migrants that are going to be voting. So it's not neck and neck. We got millions of people are going to sway things. Okay, so I'm putting my money, and I have made a money bet with a friend on the Democrats winning. But the point I want to make is this: it doesn't matter who wins from the point of view of forestalling civil war, because the blue people won't accept the red people. They hate Trump, and the Republicans won't accept Kamala and the blue people. So we're looking at a non-acceptance of the election by either one. It's going to be ugly. And of course, if Kamala wins, it's all over for the U.S. We're going to move into a police state, but it's going to be violence either way.
So you have those social tensions and also the backdrop of the economic problems, which neither one can fix.
That's right. And that's the next thing that's going to
Can I
happen.
reach over you?
Oh, by all means.
Thank you. Sorry. Don't mean be impolite, but you're making me think of something.
Yeah, so it's going to get ugly in 3 weeks. And it's funny because everything is still under control and mellow and predictable almost everywhere. But there's just an excellent chance that in the next few months, everybody can see it coming, but it's going to happen. It's like World War I. People could see it coming, and it happened. Or World War II. They could see it coming, and it happened. So this is the same thing. Everybody can see it coming, but can't stop it from happening. Anyway, I hope I'm dead wrong.
You're obviously right. The only question is on timing. I mean, the snowpack is there and the sun is up. There's going to be an avalanche. The question is when. That's the only real question. And how's it going to look? You were talking earlier. Sorry, I reached over you. I didn't mean to be impolite. You were talking earlier, though, about when gold was $20 for an ounce. And now, you know what's going to lose. We know this is going to lose. And everybody holding this is going to lose. Because in Thailand, there's a saying, big brother holds gold and little brother holds cash. I mean, it's old knowledge. It's nothing that's new. Here, they trade in gold daily, right? And I know mentioning gold all the time probably gets boring for some people, but it's like there was a lot of people in North Carolina that should have had water filters that didn't have them. Of course, their homes may have been wiped out with their water filters too. But I mean, it's time to keep preparing because we are clearly going to lose this. I think people watching know you guys talk already know that.
That $20 used to be redeemable at the Treasury for one of these. But it's not going to happen now because now this is worth about $2,700 or something like that. And this piece of paper is still just worth a nominal $20.
Now you need 130 of these to buy this.
Yeah.
These now 130 of these may weigh more than this. I don't even know.
And
Speaking of weight, I heard an interesting thing today. It was that in 1970, I guess, it was in British pounds, but it took basically half a kilogram of $5 5-pound notes to buy a kilogram of gold. That was just the weight of the bills. Today it's 12 kilograms of $5 British pounds or 5-pound notes for a kilo of gold.
That's amazing.
The weight ratio is just a pure weight.
When the more I read a lot of history, and obviously all three of us do, we're all in that category. And how often when you're reading a book, does it come down to, and then the king took the other king's gold, or then they took it from the people, or then, I mean, it's gold. I'm reading a book now on the Tower, it's called the Tower of Basel or Basel, depending on pronunciation, it's about the BIS, the Bank of International Settlements. And in Basel or Basel, Switzerland, right? In the book, as I'm reading it today, they just stole the gold from Czechoslovakia, right? With the help of the Bank of England, and just stole all their gold and went straight to the Nazis. They didn't just steal the gold. They stole the gold, gave it to the Nazis, and the Nazis used it to buy weapons, which then, blah, 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 blah. These wars are hugely about gold. It's amazing. The more history you read and the more that you've been talking about that since I was in diapers, I think, and buying gold since I was in diapers. But most of us don't know. And in Japan and the United States and Europe, people aren't taught anything about gold. But all of the bankers sure know.
Yeah, one thing to remember is that your government is not your friend, and statecraft and politics is all about theft.
Exactly.
Bottom line.
All right, let's talk about predictions. You guys have some predictions that we're going to keep a tally of these predictions, and we're going to refer back to them to see if we're right or wrong about what might happen. What do you guys got this week for predictions?
That's a toughie.
This is like a chess move where who goes first, aren't let's see, predictions. You want me to go first?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Well, there's a lot of, by the way, let me say something about how I make my predictions. I work on always developing and modifying and forming a paradigm that is predictive. So I don't watch the storms and the hurricanes so much, except that they will get you killed if you don't pay attention to them. But I'm watching more for the climate, let's say, or the Gulf Stream or the jet stream, the steady standing streams, because that's where I can make more accurate predictions. Like that's how I predicted that Nord Stream, something would happen to it, and that Groningen gas field would be closed. I was doing all this publicly, went to Germany twice talking about, I think something's going to happen in the north. How did I predict that? It wasn't through supercomputer mind. It was just watching and figuring out what are they actually doing? What's their intent and what's their capabilities? And what would I do if I were trying to deindustrialize Europe? If I were trying to I'm going somewhere with this on predictions. If I were trying to deindustrialize Europe, I would damage Germany as much as I could. If I wanted to damage Germany and Russia simultaneously, well, first of all, I would take out BASF, which is the huge chemical company there in Ludwigshafen, Germany. So Masako Ganaha and I went there twice. The second time we went there was 12 days before Nord Stream got blown up, right? And so, and publishings, I think something's going to happen to it, right? I don't know what, maybe a software attack or something, but anyway, it turned out it was explosives. And so, and likewise with Groningen. The Groningen was a kill shot with nothing but information war. And Groningen is the biggest gas field in Europe, in northern Netherlands. It is absolutely vital, and it's switched off, total kill shot, nothing but information war. If you want to cause famines, if you want to destroy Europe, you would do things like take out Nord Stream, take out Groningen, and just continue. War in Ukraine is perfect. And you would flood the borders with millions of people that are absolutely incompatible with even with each other, much less with the weaker European victim class at this point. And these are the things that I would do. And it's very clear that the powers that be, these globalist oligarchical constellations, wish to destroy the United States, destroy Japan, destroy here. Thailand's very important. A lot of people don't realize that. Destroy the United States, Canada. What would I do? I would flood them with drugs, right? This is old knowledge. This isn't anything new. I'd flood them with drugs. Doug and I had dinner a couple times with an attorney over here in the last week, and he is an American. He's been here for 17 years, and he told us over dinner the other night that there's 9,400 licenses now for marijuana facilities here in Thailand. They're all over the place, right? Now,
Each of them with a shop, because you can't get a license without opening a shop.
There's a shop like 2 to 3 minutes walk from us, right?
They're everywhere.
They're everywhere. And keep in mind, I had an office here in Thailand before. I have a base. I've been all over this country, right? So I have a baseline to judge from. That was not here 2 years ago. And it's clear that the IOM, which is the International Organization for Migration, that's the main engine causing these invasions. They have an office in Bangkok now. And I could go on and on, but Thailand is under direct attack, right? And Japan is under direct attack. Canada, dead. I would call it dead at this point. I mean, for purposes of triage, I would call it dead, right? Ireland, for purposes of triage, I would call it dead. United Kingdom, dead. Luxembourg, dead, right? And Netherlands, still alive, but it's going, I would not even treat it as a patient at this point. I mean, because I'm talking about triage on the war front at this point because the people aren't standing up. What do I think is coming next? I've been warning since early 2020 that I think there's going to be very big famines, right? And I strongly think that now, more so than ever. Like that paradigm that these people are trying to create global famines, which will create HAARP, human osmotic pressure, which is the push and pull of migration. That famine creates massive amounts of HAARP, which can be used to invade other countries, right? And so that's why I spend so much time in the Darien Gap, watching them build that route out, the invasion route. That was, again, this paradigm is how I predicted that screwworms would make their way back from Panama into the United States. These are flesh-eating worms that can kill billions of dollars with of cattle and sheep and everything else, including kill people. These are flesh-eating larvae that are very bad for agriculture. I made that flat-footed prediction based on nothing but the paradigm that those could be used to crush us. And I saw the mechanism, how our Department of Agriculture could let them come back up. And I published it all in advance that I think the screwworm, I published that like 3 years ago, right? And now here they are. Now, so I'm setting the table saying all these things. This paradigm, if your paradigm is accurate, a couple of things should be true. One is you should not be caught surprised. When you see something happen, you shouldn't go, whoa, I didn't see that coming. That means you need to rework your paradigm, right? If you feel that, I didn't see that coming. Okay, so either it was noise in the system or your paradigm's just wrong. So you got to never get married to your paradigm. Throw it out the window if it doesn't work, right? Or keep modifying it. But with that paradigm, it should also be predictive. And you should be able to predict things way beyond the evidence. Like you should be able to infer things way beyond your headlights, way beyond what the evidence supports, like the screwworm thing and Nord Stream getting destroyed and Groningen closing down. Groningen wasn't way out of the headlights. There were a few people that already thought that might happen. But the Nord Stream destruction, I'm not sure if anybody saw that one coming. I saw it as clear as day. We went there twice. Screwworms went there, reported that I thought they were going to come back. So I'm saying all that to say, my prediction, there's going to be, if my paradigm is accurate, we're going to end up with huge famines. It doesn't mean everybody on the world is going to starve to death, but a lot of people will. And these will be major HAARP creators, human osmotic pressure invasion creators to seal the deal on the destruction of the United States. And by the way, Mexico, when I'm down in Mexico and I bring it up to them, they're like, no, they're just passing through. I'm like, listen, man, they will kill you and they will take your stuff. And they will use the same invasion corridors that are passing through you now to come to us to take you. And already many of these aliens are staying in Mexico. They are staying in Panama now. Like many of the Venezuelans are staying in Panama. So what do I think? Famines. I don't know when they're going to happen though, because I never get the timing right.
Will the famines affect people in the U.S. outside of causing more migration there? Obviously it would cause global food prices to go up, so it affect them on the price side, but would you expect there to be famine among the U.S. agricultural sector too?
Yeah. When I was saying this in early 2020, people often would say, rightly, don't you understand the United States is the world's largest food exporter? Huh? Totally get it. Got it. That doesn't stop famine from occurring at all. In fact, Ukraine has always been it's a breadbasket of Europe. And look, they've had severe famines. Ireland's got plenty of food. They've had severe famines. The Henan province, China, is the breadbasket of China. They've had, Mao's Great Famine. And the Henan was some of the worst starvation occurred in Henan, a huge breadbasket. Or when I was in the Iraq War, actually, there was no famines there because we were there. However, Diyala province, where I spent a lot of time, is a breadbasket, let's say the main breadbasket of Iraq, right? And I was physically present with the commander who was actually threatening somebody to release food. I published this. It's all online. The Sunni were keeping the Shia were keeping the food from the Sunni. It was just, they had the ability to withhold the food. Sunni were starting to get very hungry, and it was causing a lot of problems. And General Petraeus messaged me. He said, hey, you should go talk to somebody. And I went on this mission, and the whole mission was to do nothing but come take food from Shia who were keeping the food to starve the Sunni, right? I mean, there's a lot of reasons that famines occur beyond merely lack of food, right? For instance, there were serious food problems in the early 1920s in Germany due to the hyperinflation, right? And because people couldn't afford it. When people can't afford it, people start stealing it. They start gleaning, as it were, right? There's already people gleaning in Europe, by the way, which I predicted in 2016 numerous times. Now it's starting to get more intense. People that don't know what gleaning is, that's a term used in the Bible. But anyway, but the bottom line is, let's skip past the biblical parts. But when people go directly to the farm and just steal food, right? And take food. Well, gleaning is not actually stealing, but not to get into that. But the bottom line is people now are directly taking food off of farms, which was easy to predict. As soon as I saw the huge numbers of people coming into Europe, I was like, they're going to steal your food. I mean, I live in those countries they come from. I know how they roll. But so when the prices go up, what'll happen is they will start stealing all the farm food. And for instance, one lady told me, this is a couple of years ago already, she told me she woke up and all the avocados were off of her tree, right? And she was so angry because she'd lived there all her life. She said, I might just chop down the whole tree because I don't want them to come do that again. And I'm like, actually, you've just repeated something that happens through history. The farmers lose, all their stuff gets stolen. So they either lose, sometimes they burn down their own farm. Sometimes they just leave. So that first season, when people start stealing the food, there was still food, but then the farmers either go bankrupt or they leave. And then the second season, there's honestly just not enough food, right? There's different ways you can get into famine. There's, volcanic issues, there's locusts, there's drought, there's floods, there's war, of course. Hyperinflation can lead you to it. But we're looking at man-made famines here on an epic scale, like, again, cutting Nord Stream, cutting Groningen, and many other things. Famines.
Wow. Crazy. It's crazy. Doug, what do you got?
Well, let me underline what Michael said. He mentioned gleaning and gleaners. When I was a kid, I remember having noted a painting. I think the painter was Jean-Vincent Millet, and it was called The Gleaners. And it showed,
It's famous.
yeah, several farm women, and they're not harvesting wheat. They're picking each little grain that the harvesters have left when they harvested. So this is like gleaning is, picking the little bit that's left over after it's been gone through. So it's nothing new, even in the West. As far as U.S. agriculture and famine in the U.S. is concerned, for years, as a commodity trader, which I am, not serious, but I trade commodities, I've wondered about these giant agricultural monocultures we have in the U.S., where corn and wheat and soybeans, you go to parts of the country and it's mile after mile of the same crop, all from the same seed from these seed companies, and all cared for with the use of Roundup and so forth, and watered with draining the Ogallala aquifer and other aquifers. And I'm just wondering, could a virus or a really nasty bacteria take out these giant monocultures? Or at some point, we have a drought and the aquifer is not adequate to, this is all possible. Well, anyway, that's not what I was going to talk about. I'm just reacting and reinforcing what you said, which I agree with 100%, Michael. Two things I was going to bring up. What should you do about it? Really, as a speculation, I watch these crappy little, generally Canadian traded resource stocks, because in the finance world, about 80% of all the financing of metals and mining stocks is done in Canada, basically in Vancouver, not in London, not in New York, but in Canada. And I watched the VSC, the Vancouver Stock Index. And after having hit a low of about 500 some months ago, it's been edging up. And the last time I looked, it was about 590 is what it was. So it's in an uptrend. And I think we're finally in a bull market for these crappy resource stocks. Talking all the metals and oil too, and gas, especially natural gas, actually, which is the one thing which is objectively cheap is natural gas. So speculation, that's where I'm going right now. I've been there for some time. So I guess that's one prediction, that we're actually in a resource bull market now, very early stages. And the second thing is, I'll underline my prediction. I hate to say this, but the bad guys, the Democrats, the Kamalistas, I think they're going to win. And it's not going to be good. I'll reinforce that prediction right up until Guy Fawkes Day, which is November 5th.
November
when it
5th.
takes
Right. Well, we'll have a little watch party in Buenos Aires that day. A little file meetup in my hotel.
And I'll be glad that I'll be in Buenos Aires and not in New York City when that goes down.
Oh,
Go ahead.
you mentioned that, Matt, do you have a couple more minutes or?
Oh, of course. Yeah.
Okay. I don't want to keep going, but you mentioned the monocultures and,
Yeah, we got another show to do next week.
oh, I'll save something. I'm emptying out all my knowledge out of my head now.
Yeah, I just want
But,
I do want to ask one. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I was going to say that the monocultures, the Irish famine from 1845, arguably, to 1854, arguably. Now, Irish famine experts, I've only read 3 books on that famine, so I'm not an expert on it. I know there's people that have really studied it a lot. So I know that on the bookends, on the actual timing, there's some argument. But let's say 1845, 1854. But they had one Irish potato that was, the predominant potato was called the Irish lumper. And a theory is that there was some sort of infection that may have come from bird or bat guano that caused that. I don't know what caused it, but obviously there were other issues as well, like the English and others trying to take land and the normal land grab and trying to genocide the Irish and that sort of thing. So obvious, and they actually cut off Americans from sending shiploads full of food, and even one of the American Indian tribes donated to the Irish and that sort of thing. So I mean, but that was partly actually war and partly, I think, natural. But the monoculture of the Irish lumper potato seemed to be a major factor.
So let me, you mentioned earlier about the ability to be able to predict the future really depends upon having an effective paradigm, like what's actually happening now. Because you can just see these trends and they're going to intersect at some point.
Yeah.
I find I'd say I have that same view. That's how I've tried to look at it. And there's been one thing that has surprised me recently that I didn't expect, or that it wasn't clear. And it was just a tactic rather than anything necessarily new. But I just wonder, I'll share my failure in being able to predict the future and wonder if you have others that you might share. It's that Israeli use of radios and pagers as explosive devices did shock me. Like, that's one of those things that shocked me. And I don't know, should I have been shocked by that, or should that have been predictable? What do you think?
I thought it was predictable, actually. I mean, that's things that some of us have talked about for a while. Supply chain interdiction. I mean, yeah, I mean, that's quite dangerous. Obviously, well, I don't need to say that now. It's quite obvious. But if you said this years ago, it would have sounded, or even 3 months ago, it would have sounded insane. But actually, for those who are paying attention to war and these sorts of things, it wasn't shocking at all. They did it, and there's nothing that they won't do. There's a man will never see the cult that he's in. And that cult is a death cult, and there is nothing they won't do. I've studied cults. I infiltrated and lived with a cult in California, actually, years ago. That was amazingly educational. And I've just learned through life and the study that there is nothing that a cult won't do, and I mean zero.
Makes sense to me.
So let's start a cult.
All right, I'm going to add one observation I had. I know this is for you guys, but I think, because you didn't mention it, that I think is noteworthy in the information war, and that is the cyber attack on the Internet Archive this week, where there's been a major failure of it, and they hacked into it, and it's, at least last I checked this morning, it's down, like it's not available. So this repository of the past on the internet, lots of collections of data, is gone right now. And you could see why, if you're bad actors here, why you'd want to destroy that history. So it's just something to keep an eye on. I mean, hopefully the backups, they can resurrect it, but it is under heavy attack at this point.
Real danger, because all the world's information is digital now. So if you can destroy the digital economy, you can wipe out an immense amount of knowledge.
Like your bank account,
For instance,
obviously.
and it's a trivial thing, but I don't buy books online. I buy books in paper, which will last a while anyway.
Speaking of which, I heard this is a good book.
Oh, yeah, it is a favorite of mine.
One of my favorites too.
It opens up. That's why I put the.
All right. That's Doug's totally incorrect book. Doug's got a bunch of books. You can find them on Amazon. That's one of the good ones.
Or you can find them on my desk.
Yeah, I appreciate it. I appreciate that, Michael.
That's a good plug.
Do they look backwards on your screen, or are they?
No,
are they
we see them right. They look right.
Because to me, that they look backwards.
Yeah. And so the most Assassins is the most recent in Doug's fiction trilogy, which are pretty amazing. So
Yeah,
great.
and as Doug mentioned earlier today, because you can write things in fiction that will get you in trouble if you write them as if they're nonfiction.
That's right.
That's true.
Okay. All right. Well, I think that's good for the first week, guys. Thanks so much for doing this. We'll be back next week with the same format. Anybody watching this video, leave in the comments what you liked about the format, suggestions for how we might improve it. Any feedback is useful. So until next week, guys, thanks so much. Take care. Thanks.